That's not just in your constitutional classes, it's in the real world.
Great. Now, if you're at home and you're watching, don't forget, if you've got a question, leave it in the YouTube comments or head over to Twitter at #CoronaNomics. Now, thinking about how we unwind the furlough scheme has been a hot topic this week. Here's a question from Matt Griffith. Have we got that?
Hi.
There we go.
Ben, Lizzie and Torsten. I'm Matt Griffith. I'm a Director of Policy at Business West, which is the Chamber of Commerce for the West Country. I just want to ask a question about probably the biggest issue in relation to the phasing out of government support, which is what the impact of the Chancellor's measures on furloughing would be, and the tension there is, or the balance there is between, on the one hand, clearly different business sectors are going to be unevenly experiencing the easing of lockdown, with potential much longer periods of not being able to operate fully for places, things like hospitality, tourism, and retail, versus the treatment of all businesses on an equal footing in relation to how furloughing will be eased, and particularly the shift of burden of some of the costs which will kick in August through to October. And just be good to get from Torsten a sense of what the Treasury's thinking is here, what they sense the reaction might be, and in particular whether they are almost expecting that there will be a spike in unemployment and layoffs from those business sectors that will not be fully operational for, and therefore will be unable to meet that kind of greater burden of costs.
Fantastic. So over to you, Torsten.
Well, there's a big question. In fact, lots of different questions in there. So the job retention scheme is obviously by far the biggest, the centrepiece of the government's response to this crisis. 8 million jobs having their wages paid, 80% of their wages paid by the state. We've never seen anything like that before. The most important thing to say about that scheme is that it's really important that we don't, some people have been in favour of ripping that plaster off, saying people are getting addicted to it and we should just get on with getting rid of the scheme. That is a very bad idea when the country is already on course for the highest unemployment in 25 years. But it will need to be phased out over time. And that's partly because the way to think about this, the reason this is hard for policymakers is in the short term, we've got really clear objectives. Keep people keep their living standards up, pay their wages, and also keep them attached to their firm so that we can make sure that those good quality relationships that help build a stronger recovery are in place. People can go back to do jobs that they're used to doing when we're able to lift the lockdown. But as we move further away from the hard lockdown and into the phased reopening of the economy, some social distancing going on, changing the way we operate, but not hard closures, then our incentives and the government policy does need to shift towards helping both give firms the incentive to open up as far as they can, so they can't just leave their workers off the books and get those paid by the state. We want them to bring workers back if they can. And obviously we want workers, if they're not going to be able to go back to the job that they've already got eventually, it's not in their interest that we just leave them out of work for 6 months paying their wages, because history tells us that's very bad for their long-term careers. So those are the trade-offs the government faces. Now, they've given their answer so far, the government have, which is the scheme will exist in its current form until August. Then they will start employers making some contributions. Now, what some contributions means towards those costs is now still to be determined, and the government's got 9 days, I think, until to set out what they think that is. And that is a really difficult decision. If they go too high, ask government firms to pay, say, 50% of furloughed workers' wages, then lots of firms may be pushed into deciding, right, well, in that case, I'm just going to lay people off and not try. Or if they go too slowly, the danger is firms don't open up at the pace they should. And the reason it's difficult is because different sectors are going to be in a different place in August. And so if they set a high number, that might work for accountancy firms, but it's not going to work for hospitality firms who will just lay people off in thousands. So the answer is, one, you probably should have sectoral differentiation, which the government so far has been reluctant to engage in. My view is they probably should be dealing with that, even though it is very difficult and messy. If you don't want to do that, you end up introducing sectoral differentiation by the back door. So instead of making the scheme different for different sectors, you just give them money to pay it. So I just make a grant to the hospitality sector to pay that money back to me, and I get to the same result via another route. So that looks like where they're heading, but you're definitely going to need something like that. And we should all be prepared, even if we get this policy completely right, we are going to see another phased increase in unemployment claims as the job retention scheme starts to be wound down.
Looking back slightly, Torsten, I mean, the job retention scheme was very similar to something that the Resolution Foundation proposed before they came out. But do you feel a degree of pride that the government basically adopted a scheme with broad outlines of which you were recommending?
I definitely do think the government has done the right thing, and I think it's really important to understand. When you face an economic crisis, it's really important that your policy response isn't just the general. I'll do what I normally do in recessions. It's got to be targeted at the focus of this recession. And so this recession, what is very different is how sectorally variated it is. So some sectors closed down entirely, some still operating. And in that world, if you just focus your macro policy response on giving everybody some money, trying general fiscal stimulus, which is what you would do in a normal recession, it won't work, because the people you need to get support to and create economic demand for are working in the sectors where we can't get the economic activity to take place, like retail and like hospitality. So you need a targeted scheme that gets money to those in need.
So